In UCHE, a lively town where every neighbor knew each other's story, Adana carried a silent pain that no one cared to hide for her. Each time she walked into her husband's family compound, eyes turned, voices dropped, and then came the whispers. She has been married for years yet no child, some would say, shaking their heads with pity, while others laughed behind their hands. The sharpest sting always came from her mother-in-law, who never missed a chance to humiliate her. At family gatherings, while food was being served and laughter filled the air, she would clear her throat loudly and declare, "A tree without fruit is useless." The words sliced through Adana's heart like a knife, and everyone understood what she meant. Cousins smirked, aunties exchanged knowing glances, and her sister-in-law would giggle openly as if it was entertainment. Adana forced herself to smile, even when her chest ached with shame. She wanted to shout to remind them that children come from God and not from man, but her voice always got trapped in her throat. She sat quietly, her hands folded, her soul breaking inside while the world around her mocked the one thing she longed for the most. That evening in UCHE, the family house was full. The long wooden table in the dining room carried bowls of steaming jollof rice, goat meat pepper soup, fried plantain, and bottles of palm wine. Everyone was talking loudly, their voices rising and falling, laughter echoing across the room. Adana sat at the far end of the table, quietly serving food to her husband and his relatives, her smile polite but thin. She tried to pretend she belonged, even though deep down she felt like a stranger in her own husband's home. It was in the middle of this noisy dinner that her sister-in-law Chinyu leaned forward with a sly smile and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Our brother should have married a real woman, not a barren one." The room went silent for a heartbeat, then exploded with cruel laughter. Some cousins slapped the table in amusement, others hid their smiles behind their glasses, and even her mother-in-law shook her head, clicking her tongue as if the statement carried truth. Adana felt her face flush hot, her hands trembling under the table. Her spoon slipped from her fingers and clattered softly against her plate. Tears pressed at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back quickly, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Her heart pounded, her stomach twisted, and still she forced herself to sit there, staring down at the untouched food. She looked toward her husband, praying that he would defend her, that he would at least scold his sister for such wicked words. But Chuka only leaned back in his chair with a smirk, his silence speaking louder than any insult. The laughter swelled around her, and she sat frozen in place, the words "barren one" echoing inside her head like a curse. In that moment, surrounded by clinking plates and mocking voices, Adana felt smaller than she had ever felt in her life. The laughter around the table had already pierced Adana's heart, but nothing prepared her for what came next. She turned her eyes to Chuka, her husband, the one man who was supposed to shield her from the world. For a brief second, she hoped he would say something to silence them, to remind everyone that she was his wife and deserved respect. But instead, Chuka picked a piece of meat from his plate, chewed slowly, and with a careless laugh said, "Perhaps God made her just to cook, not to give children." The room erupted again in roaring laughter. His cousins slapped their thighs, his sister nearly fell off her chair, and even his mother covered her mouth to hide her smile. Adana felt her whole world collapse in that single moment. The man who had once sworn to love her in sickness and in health, who had held her hand on their wedding day, now mocked her as if she were nothing. She couldn't swallow the food in her mouth. She pushed her plate away, her appetite gone, her dignity crushed before everyone's eyes. That night, after the laughter had died and the house grew quiet, Adana sat alone in the small room she shared with Chuka. She stared at her wedding pictures on the wall. Smiling faces, promises made, dreams once shared. Now all of it felt like a cruel joke. Silent tears ran down her cheeks as she folded her clothes into a small travel bag. Her hands shook, but her decision was firm. She could no longer live under a roof where her pain was entertainment. Without a word, she picked up her bag, slipped on her sandals, and stepped out into the night. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the air smelled of rain. As she walked down the lonely road away from the compound, lightning flashed in the distance. Her heart was broken, but she knew one thing for sure. She would rather face the unknown alone than stay where she was mocked by the very man who vowed to protect her. The rain had started to fall heavily, soaking Adana's wrapper and making her sandals slippery on the muddy roadside. She clutched her small travel bag close to her chest as cars rushed past, splashing dirty water onto her legs. Each step felt heavier, and the tears she had been holding back now mixed freely with the rain on her face. She didn't know where she was going. All she knew was that she could never go back. Then, out of the misty road, a sleek black car slowed to a stop beside her. The tinted glass rolled down and a deep, calm voice called out, "Madam, are you all right?" Adana froze for a moment, clutching her bag tighter, afraid to trust a stranger in the middle of the night. But when her eyes met his, she saw no mockery, no judgment, only concern. The man inside was Obinna Nwachukwu, one of the most respected real estate investors in the region, though Adana did not recognize him immediately. His tailored suit was spotless, his car spotless despite the rain, and his presence carried quiet authority. But what struck her most was the softness in his gaze as he looked at her trembling frame. "You'll get sick out here," he said gently. "Please let me give you a ride." Adana hesitated, her pride whispering that she should refuse. But her body was shivering, her strength failing. Slowly, she nodded and Obinna stepped out into the rain, opening the back door for her himself. That small gesture, a wealthy man lowering himself to shield a stranger with his umbrella, broke something inside her. As she slid into the warm leather seat, her wet clothes clinging to her skin, Adana felt a strange peace settle in her chest. For the first time that night, she wasn't invisible. Someone had seen her pain, not to laugh at it, but to lift her from it. And though she didn't yet know it, this meeting on a rainy roadside would change her life forever. Inside the warmth of the car, Adana sat quietly, her fingers twisting the edge of her wrapper. The steady sound of the rain on the roof seemed to match the rhythm of her breaking heart. Obinna drove without rushing her, stealing glances at her face through the rearview mirror. After a long silence, his voice came softly, "You don't have to tell me, but I can see you're carrying more than just that bag." Adana's lips trembled. At first, she thought she would stay silent, but something about his tone, calm, respectful, kind, unlocked the words she had buried for so long. Slowly, haltingly, she told him everything. How her in-laws mocked her, how her husband laughed with them, how her womb had become the reason she was treated like less than human. Her voice cracked several times, tears rolling down her cheeks as she spoke, but Obinna never interrupted. He listened, his hands steady on the wheel, his silence full of respect. When she finished, she felt empty, like she had poured out years of pain in one night. For a moment, the car was filled only with the hum of the engine and the patter of rain. Then Obinna spoke, his voice steady but filled with warmth. "Adana, your worth is not measured by children. You are more precious than gold." The words sank into her like medicine on a deep wound. No one had ever told her that before. All her life she had been judged by what she had not given, never by who she was. She turned her face toward him, her eyes wide with disbelief, but all she saw was sincerity in his gaze. A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was relief. That night, as the car carried her away from humiliation, Adana felt a spark of something new in her heart. Hope. A journey she never planned for had just begun, and though she didn't know where it would lead, she finally believed she was worth more than the shame they had tied around her name. The months that followed were like nothing Adana had ever known. For the first time in years, she lived without constant fear of insults. Obinna treated her with a gentleness that healed wounds she didn't even realize were still bleeding. He made sure she had everything she needed, not only comfort but dignity. He spoke to her like an equal, not a burden. Each day with him felt like a breath of fresh air after years of choking silence. One morning, after weeks of feeling weak and restless, Adana visited the hospital. She expected to hear it was just stress or maybe malaria. But when the doctor smiled and said, "Congratulations, you are pregnant," her whole body went still. She blinked, her heart racing. Pregnant. The word sounded foreign on her tongue. But before the shock could settle, the doctor added, "And not just one child, you are carrying twins." Tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. She pressed her hands against her belly as if she could already feel the tiny lives inside her. After all the years of being called barren, after all the nights she had cried herself to sleep, here she was, carrying not one but two blessings. When she told Obinna, he pulled her close, his smile wide, his eyes shining with joy. "Twins," he repeated, almost in awe, as though God himself had sent a message through them. Then he looked into her eyes and said, "We will raise them in love and honor. They will never know shame. They will grow in dignity because they are a gift, not a weapon for mockery." Adana sobbed against his chest, not from pain this time, but from overwhelming gratitude. For the first time in her life, her tears were not bitter but sweet. What her enemies mocked her for, God had turned into her greatest testimony. The barren tree they laughed at was now about to bloom twice over. Word traveled fast in UCHE. It was on people's lips in the marketplace, whispered at the tailor's shop, and spread like wildfire in the family compound. Chuka's new wife was pregnant. The same man who once mocked Adana for her empty womb now walked around with his chest out, boasting of his coming child. His mother sang praises in the neighborhood, saying, "At last, a real woman has entered my son's house." To her, this new wife was proof that the shame Adana carried was her own fault. The family wasted no time in planning a baby shower that would be the talk of the town. Invitations were printed in gold letters, food was ordered in abundance, and a decorated hall was booked weeks ahead. Every auntie, cousin, and neighbor was invited. "This is how a fruitful wife is celebrated," they said with pride, as if the event itself was a weapon to erase Adana's existence. Behind their smiles, there was a cruel satisfaction. They had laughed at Adana, cast her aside, and now they felt justified. To them, this grand celebration was not just for a baby. It was a final stamp of victory over the woman they once called barren. The news reached Adana quietly, carried by the same whispers that once stabbed her heart. She sat in her new home with Obinna, her hands resting on her growing belly, listening to how her former in-laws paraded themselves in joy. For a moment the pain of old wounds returned. The thought of them laughing, clapping, and praising another woman for what they said she could never do made her chest tighten. But when Obinna looked at her, his calm strength steadied her heart. She was no longer the broken woman they mocked at the dining table. She was carrying twins wrapped in love, walking in dignity. Still, the irony of receiving an invitation to that baby shower would soon bring a decision that would change everything. The day the invitation arrived, Adana held it in her hands for a long time, staring at the gold letters that shimmered against the white card. Her name was written neatly among the list of guests, as if nothing had ever happened, as if she had not once been thrown out of that very family with shame stamped on her forehead. Her fingers trembled as she read it again and again. A baby shower. The celebration she had once prayed for. The celebration she was denied. Her first instinct was to tear it into pieces and throw it away. Why should she walk back into the place where her tears had been their entertainment? Why should she sit and clap for the same people who had branded her barren? She pressed the card against her chest, her heart aching with old memories. She remembered the laughter, her husband's betrayal, the silence that crushed her. Going there felt like reopening wounds she had just begun to heal. That evening, she showed the invitation to Obinna. He read it carefully, then lifted his eyes to hers. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. "Adana, sometimes silence isn't strength. Sometimes silence gives them power. Let them see who you truly are now." Adana swallowed hard. The thought of stepping into that hall, facing the same eyes that once mocked her, made her knees weak. But Obinna's hand covered hers, steady and reassuring. His gaze told her she was no longer the rejected woman they had scorned. She was carrying twins wrapped in dignity, walking beside a man who valued her more than gold. That night, as she lay awake, she made her decision. She would not attend in bitterness nor in anger. She would attend as a testimony. If they wanted to see her broken, they would instead see her risen. And in that decision her heart grew stronger, ready for the moment that would silence every voice that once mocked her. The hall was decorated with balloons, bright fabrics, and golden ribbons. Music floated into the air as guests arrived in their best outfits. Laughter and chatter filled the space, and the family walked around proudly, greeting their guests as if they were royalty. Outside the venue, luxury cars lined the street, each one carrying people eager to witness the grand baby shower of Chuka's new wife. Then, as another sleek black car pulled up, heads began to turn. The door opened slowly, and the first to step out was Obinna, tall and commanding in his tailored agbada, the kind of man whose presence made people fall silent without him saying a word. Cameras clicked, whispers spread, and eyes followed him. But the real shock came when Adana stepped out of the car. She wore a flowing golden ankara gown that shimmered under the afternoon sun, every thread glowing as if stitched with light. Around her neck lay coral beads, and her geli sat proudly on her head. But what stole the breath from the crowd was the gentle curve of her baby bump. radiant and undeniable. Gasps spread quickly through the gathering. "Adana?" someone whispered in disbelief. "Is that not Chuka's former wife? But she is pregnant." Mouths fell open, eyes widened, and suddenly the music seemed to fade beneath the roar of whispers. Obinna walked beside her, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back, his face calm, confident, untouchable. Adana lifted her chin high, her steps slow but graceful, her eyes straight ahead. She did not need to say a word. Her presence alone was louder than any insult they had ever thrown at her. Inside the hall, the family froze in shock, their smiles stiffening, their pride turning sour. The woman they once mocked as Barren had arrived in golden splendor, carrying twins and standing beside a man whose power and wealth dwarfed everything they had ever boasted about. In that single entrance, the tables turned, and the air itself shifted. The baby shower that was supposed to be a stage for Chuka's family suddenly became Obinna's arena. As the whispers about Adana's pregnancy filled the hall, Obinna moved with quiet authority, shaking hands with dignitaries and well-known businessmen who had come to honor him the moment they recognized his face. These were men who controlled contracts, men whose names opened doors in government offices, men who made ordinary people bow their heads in respect. They greeted him with smiles, their voices carrying admiration. "Chief Nwachukwu," one man said, bowing slightly, "what an honor to see you here." Another rushed forward to shake his hand, introducing him to guests who suddenly wanted to be noticed. It didn't take long for the crowd to realize that this was no ordinary man. His wealth and influence stretched across cities, and his reputation carried a weight that silenced arrogance. Chuka's family watched in disbelief, their pride slowly drained as they began to understand what had just unfolded before them. The woman they mocked, the wife they cast aside as useless, was now standing tall beside a man of unimaginable power. Adana's glow was no longer just about her pregnancy, but about her place at Obinna's side. Her mother-in-law's smile faltered as she realized how small her insults now seemed. The same people she had boasted to were now whispering about Adana's new life, not her new daughter-in-law. Her sister-in-law, who once laughed the loudest, now hid behind her glass, avoiding Adana's gaze. And Chuka himself sat stiffly, his jaw clenched, unable to meet the eyes of his wealthy guests who were now bowing to his ex-wife's husband. Every handshake, every respectful greeting Obinna received was like a mirror held up to the family's shame. They had thrown away a jewel, thinking it was worthless, only to watch it shine brighter in the hands of another. And in that hall, surrounded by flashing cameras and murmurs of awe, the truth was clear. Adana was no. Adana's eyes swept across the hall, and there she saw the woman who had wounded her the most, her former mother-in-law. This was the same woman who had mocked her openly at family gatherings, the one who said loudly that a tree without fruit was useless. She had laughed at her pain, made her the butt of cruel jokes, and encouraged others to treat her like she was less than human. But now, seated at the decorated table in her wrapper and head tie, the older woman sat frozen, her lips trembling. When Adana walked past, the older woman forced a smile, but it looked weak, broken, and out of place. Her eyes darted nervously, as if searching for somewhere else to rest, but every gaze in the hall was already on her. Shame flushed her cheeks, burning hotter than the lights hanging above. For years she had bragged that her son had chosen well when he remarried, and now her pride crumbled before her eyes. Guests began to whisper, "Is this not the same woman who mocked Adana?" One murmured, "See how God has turned the story around," another replied. Every word reached her ears, each one like salt on her open wound. She tried to laugh, to look unfazed, but her voice caught in her throat. She tried to sip water, but her hand shook, spilling a little on the table. Adana did not gloat. She simply walked with grace, her golden gown sweeping the floor, her belly carrying the very proof of God's blessing. She didn't need to speak. Her presence was already a sermon. And for the first time in her life, her mother-in-law could not find her tongue. The woman who once had the loudest voice in every insult now sat in silence, her pride swallowed, her head lowered. Her power to mock had been stripped away, replaced with the heavy weight of shame. It was as if God himself had pressed her into quietness, making her watch the testimony she once said would never come to pass. And in that silence justice was complete. Chuka sat stiffly at the high table, but his mind was far from the celebration around him. The music, the laughter, even the clinking of glasses sounded distant, drowned out by the heavy thud of his own heartbeat. His eyes kept drifting toward the woman he once called his wife, the woman he had mocked, belittled, and abandoned. There she was, glowing in gold, her belly round with twins, her hand held firmly by a man whose presence commanded the entire hall. Felt like a cruel dream. Chuka remembered the nights Adana had cried in their room, begging for comfort. He remembered mocking her instead of holding her. He remembered laughing with his family as they humiliated her, convincing himself it was harmless fun. Now every memory returned like a whip against his chest. The words he had spoken, "Maybe she was only made to cook, not to give children," echoed louder in his mind than the drums beating in the hall. Obinna leaned toward Adana with such care, whispering words that made her smile, the kind of smile Chuka had not seen on her face in years. He saw the respect in the eyes of the guests, the way dignitaries bowed to greet Obinna and congratulated Adana. And in that moment, Chuka realized he had not only lost a wife, he had lost the chance to be the man she needed. His throat tightened, his vision blurred. He lowered his head quickly, pretending to adjust his seat, but his hand shot up to wipe away the tears that had escaped. Pride tried to hold him together, but it was slipping fast. The room was spinning, the laughter now sounding like mockery against him. Quietly, he stood from his chair, muttered an excuse no one cared to hear, and walked out of the hall. Outside, under the hot sun, he leaned against a wall and buried his face in his palms. For the first time in his life, he felt the sting of regret so sharp it cut deeper than any insult. The woman he once despised had become the very proof of his biggest mistake. As the evening drew on, the hall buzzed with mixed emotions. Some guests celebrated as planned, but most were still whispering about Adana's return. Her radiant glow, her twins, and the powerful man by her side. The very air felt heavy with tension, like everyone was waiting for something more to happen. Then, as the servers moved around with trays of drinks, Adana slowly rose to her feet. The clinking of glasses quieted as all eyes turned to her. She stood tall, the golden Ankara gown shimmering under the lights, her baby bump a proud testimony of grace and destiny. With calm poise she lifted her glass, her voice steady but carrying a strength that filled every corner of the room. "May no woman be mocked for what only God can decide," she began. Her words cut through the air like a blade wrapped in silk. The murmurs died completely. People leaned forward, listening, their hearts pricked by the weight of her voice. May every insult spoken against a woman return as blessing in her life. A silence deeper than any drumbeat followed. Her former mother-in-law lowered her gaze, her lips pressed tightly together. Chinyu, the sister-in-law who once laughed the loudest, could not lift her head. Even those who had never joined in mocking her now shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, ashamed of the whispers they once spread. Adana did not shout, she did not curse. Her grace was sharper than any anger could have been. She smiled gently, her eyes soft but firm, and added, "Life is not in our hands. It belongs to God alone. Let us learn to be kind." She sat down again beside Obinna, who placed his hand gently over hers, pride shining in his eyes. The hall remained in silence for several long seconds before anyone found the courage to clap. But in those few moments everyone present knew the truth. This was not just a toast. It was a testimony, and it was one that would never be forgotten. It did not take long for the story to escape the walls of the hall. Within days, UCHE was buzzing with one tale only: the return of Adana. People in the market told it as they sold their goods. Women at the hair salon whispered it with wide eyes, and men at the palm wine joint repeated it with disbelief. Everyone wanted to hear it again and again. They said, "Do you know the woman they once called Barren? She came back glowing, carrying twins in her womb." Another added, "And not just that, she walked in with Obinna Nwachukwu, the billionaire himself, holding her hand like she was the most precious thing in the world." The more it was told, the more it spread, each retelling painting her entrance in brighter colors, each whisper turning her into a legend. Even those who had mocked her before now used her name with respect. Mothers told their daughters about her strength, preachers spoke of her as a testimony, and neighbors repeated her story like a proverb: "What men mock, God multiplies." Adana had become more than a woman with twins. She was a living proof that patience can outlast cruelty, that dignity can rise above shame, and that destiny has a way of humbling those who laugh too quickly. From that day, UCHE never forgot her story. It was not just gossip, it became a lesson written in the heart of the town.